They made her scrub the saloon floor on her hands and knees very night, after the drunks had spit tobacco and shattered bottles. No one cared that her name was Asha. To them she was just the half-breed girl, small and silent, her dark braids dragging through sawdust, soaked in beer and blood. The bartender, old McCleary, would mutter curses as he kicked over the mop bucket just to watch her flinch. She never cried, not since the winter soldiers came through her village years ago. But that night after, the gambler broke a chair over a miner's back, and the sheriff turned away with a shrug. Aisha was left alone in the lamplight, her fingers raw and knees bruised. As she reached beneath the bar for another rag, her hand touched something wrapped in oilcloth, long and cold. She froze. Carefully, she pulled it free. Her breath caught. It was a rifle, her father's rifle, and suddenly everything was still. The rifle was unmistakable. Asha had not seen it since the day her father was gunned down while defending their people from a land-grabbing posse. It bore the silver eagle he'd carved into the stock, and the leather strap still smelled faintly of sage. She held it like a sacred relic, her fingers trembling until she heard footsteps, and she quickly wrapped it back and stashed it beneath the bar. But something inside her had changed. The next morning, the town was already buzzing with news of an outlaw gang moving through the hills, led by a man named Brigsame Man, who once rode with the sheriff before becoming too cruel even for lawmen. The sheriff claimed the town would be safe, but Asha saw the truth in his eyes: fear. He knew Briggs was coming, and he'd do nothing to stop him. Later that afternoon, McCleary dragged Asha out by the arm. "New rule," he sneered. "You mop while they drink." She looked out across the saloon. Cowhands, gamblers, driftersmen who didn't care that she was barefoot or that her blouse was stained with blood from cleaning broken glass. And in the corner watching was Sheriff Tully. He lifted his glass and gave her a mock salute. She dropped her eyes and knelt. That night, while wiping the mud and spit from the floorboards, she overheard two men whispering in Spanish. One had scars along his jaw, the other a limp. They were waiting for Briggs. They said the sheriff had promised not to interfere, that the saloon would serve as neutral ground, that anyone who got in the way wouldn't leave breathing. Asha's breath caught. She kept wiping, careful not to show she'd heard. But inside, the pulse of something old stirred. The way her father used to stand, shoulders straight, when settlers called him savage. The way her mother lit cedar and prayed for peace, even after everything was burned. And now, here she was, half their blood in her veins, and a rifle under the floor. That same evening, just before closing, a stranger stepped into the saloon. Dusty duster coat, torn brim hat, face mostly shadowed. He didn't speak, just sat near the fireplace and ordered hot water. Old McCleary grumbled but served him. Asha brought a towel to dry the floor near his boots. As she passed, the stranger glanced down at her wrist still red from the rope Burns McCleary had left last week. Then, softly, he said, "Your father taught me to shoot." She froze. Her heart hammered so loud she thought everyone could hear, but she didn't look up, didn't say a word, just nodded once. Later, after everyone had gone and the lamps were low, the stranger stayed. He leaned against the bar near the place where the rifle lay hidden. "Briggs is bringing 5 men, maybe 6. They'll be here by noon." His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Asha whispered, "Why warn me?" He looked away. "Because the people here think you're nothing, just a girl, just a ghost." He turned back. "But your father died so you could be more than their silence." Then he walked out the back door, vanishing into the dust. That night, Asha lay on her cot in the storeroom, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, she prayed, not in English, not in Spanish, but in her mother's tongue. She prayed for strength, for clarity, for justice, If not for herself, then for the ones who had no voice. At dawn, she rose and cleaned her face with cold water, braided her hair tight. She put on her father's old vest, still stiff with dried sweat, and returned to the saloon. McCleary shouted when he saw her with the rifle. She didn't flinch. "You said I clean while they drink," she said quietly. "Let's see how clean I can make it." By midday, the saloon was packed. The sheriff stood with arms folded, pretending to hold order while casting nervous glances toward the door. Then it opened. Briggs stepped in. Briggs was broader than Rumor, his shoulders crowding the doorframe. A red scarf hung around his neck like a mark of blood, and his boots were still flecked with desert dust. Behind him came 5 Menroof, scarred, silent, each carried iron, and each scanned the room like a wolf sniffing lambs. The saloon went quiet. Sheriff Tooley took a breath and stepped forward. "Now, Briggs, you know." Briggs cut him off with a grin. "Still talking, Tully?" He laughed, slapped the sheriff's chest with the back of his hand, and walked right past him. Asha stood behind the bar, rifle hidden beneath. Her hands were steady, her eyes tracked every movement. Briggs took the center table. Boots on the chairs, and gestured for whiskey. McCleary rushed to serve him, hands shaking so hard he spilled a shot. Briggs just chuckled and slapped the old man across the face. No one moved. Then Briggs pointed to Asha. "You, girl, come wipe this up." McCleary glanced at her, fear thick in his throat. "Go on," he hissed. "Do what he says." But Asha didn't move. Briggs stood slowly, dragging his spurs across the floor. "I said..." She reached under the bar. The rifle came up smooth, like it belonged in her hands, like it had waited for her. Briggs posed. Around the room, chairs scraped, guns shifted. The sheriff opened his mouth but said nothing. Asha looked directly into Briggs' eyes. "This is the rifle of Red Elk," she said. Her voice was calm, clear. "He was my father. You murdered him." The room froze. Briggs frowned. "What did you say?" "You murdered him," she repeated, louder now. "You and the sheriff raided our village for horses and rifles, but you didn't find the rifle. He buried it under cedar roots, where it waited." Briggs glanced at Sheriff Tully, who took a nervous step back. "That true?" Briggs growled. Tully sputtered. "She's lying. Just some half-breed girl making noise." But the stranger from before the one with the dusty duster stepped through the saloon doors. No one had seen him come in. He moved slow, but with purpose, and raised a finger toward Tully. "She's not lying. I was there." Tully gave the order. Briggs pulled the trigger. The crowd turned. Even the sheriff's deputies stiffened. Briggs snarled and went for his gun. But Asha had already raised the rifle. The crack split the silence. Briggs staggered, clutching his shoulder, blood blooming red. He fell back into the table with a crash. His men froze, unsure, until the stranger leveled his own pistol. "Leave now." The outlaws backed away, dragging their wounded leader. Not a soul in the saloon dared stop them. Tully tried to speak, but Asha leveled the rifle at him next. "I can't bring my father back," she said, "but I can end what you started." Tully stammered, "I was just following orders." "No," the stranger said, stepping forward. "You gave them." Then, to everyone's shock, the sheriff's own Deputy Young, freckled, barely more than a boy, pulled Tully's badge from his chest and set it on the bar. "You don't speak for us anymore." The sheriff's mouth opened and closed, and he walked out, shoulders smaller than before. The saloon remained silent long after the sheriff and the outlaws disappeared into the street. Asha stood behind the bar, her father's rifle resting across her arms. No one moved. No one spoke. Then McCleary, eyes wide, stumbled toward her. You just shot Briggs," he whispered. "You shot him." She looked at him, her voice like quiet thunder. I didn't shoot him. I stopped him. The stranger holstered his weapon and walked over, placing a silver coin on the bar. For the damage, he said dryly. Then he turned to Asha. You have a choice now. They'll call you trouble, a rebel, a savage, or worse, or, he nodded toward the rifle, you can make them call you leader. She stared at the coin, then at the room full of men who had once spat near her feet. Some looked away, a few met her eyes, nodding slowly, not with pity but respect. She walked to the center of the room. I will not clean this floor again, she said, not as a request, but a declaration. This floor will stay as it is, as a reminder of what happened here. The stranger smiled. Then your father can finally rest. Outside, dusk settled over the town. Word spread quickly. Briggs was wounded, the sheriff gone, and the girl once bent beneath the mop now stood with a rifle in her hand. By morning, the mayor arrived from the next town over. He questioned everyone, saw the badge left on the counter, the bullet holes in the wall, and the silence of the townsfolk who refused to lie. And so, in a decision that surprised even Asha, she was offered a new role keeper of the peace, not sheriff, not deputy, but something older, something deeper. They gave her no star, no oath, just the rifle and the space to stand. She did not speak much in the weeks that followed, but her presence changed things. The saloon, once a place of humiliation, became quiet at dusk. Drunks drank less. Fights cooled before they started. McCleary no longer barked orders, simply nodded when Asha passed. And the rifle? It stayed behind the bar, unloaded but always within reach, not as a threat, as a memory. One morning, the young deputy who had torn off the sheriff's badge brought her a bundle of cloth. Inside was a vest made of deer hide, hand-stitched and lined with soft wool. My ma made it, he said, looking at his boots. Said you should have something of your own to wear, something that wasn't just your father's. Asha took it gently. It smelled of cedar. Outside, children played. Women walked without hurrying, and when strangers came through town now, they paused at the saloon doorway, looked around, and stayed quiet, because stories traveled. And Asha's story had taken root. In time, she spoke in gatherings, short words, clear ones. She taught the townsfolk her mother's songs of wind, of sky, of fire remembered. She stood between cowhands and quarrels. She buried knives left in back alleys. And when she walked the street, people stepped acid and aught from fear but reverence. She was no longer the girl who cleaned their dirt. She was the one who reminded them where it came from. And that made all the difference. Some stories don't begin with heroes. They begin in silence, in wounds hidden behind eyes too tired to weep. Asha's life was never meant to be a tale told in saloons or etched into dusty ledgers. Yet when cruelty became tradition and justice a whisper, she rose not with fury, but with memory. The rifle she found was not just metal and wood, it was lineage. It carried every lesson her father had spoken by firelight, every lullaby her mother hummed when the world frayed at the edges. In her hands, it did not promise vengeance. It offered clarity. In the West, strength is often mistaken for volume, for the loudest gun, the sharpest glare. But true strength, the kind that shifts the soul of a town, comes softly. It kneels beside bloodstains. It waits year after year until the day arrives when silence becomes too heavy to bear. Asha reminded them of that weight, and in doing so she became something rare, a bridge between the ones forgotten and the ones who had forgotten, between what was taken and what must never be taken again. Justice doesn't always ride in fast with guns blazing. Sometimes it rises slowly from the floorboards, holding the same mop once used to erase pain, now refusing to kneel. That is where true power lives. not in how loud you shout, but in how long you refuse to be silenced.